so that we could organize around any other issues that were to like come up around prisons specifically, as well as just to have programming for the student body to educate, as well as like protest and direct service, all of that. So educational in that educational sphere. One example is a teach-in that we did a couple months ago on solitary confinement, and so that was really great. Like, just had a really interesting conversation. Showed a documentary, kind of like grounded people in what it's like, and tried to get students to mobilize. We had them call representatives like immediately after around a bill that was in Illinois, and then also like trying to mobilize to get them to go to a community meeting around this bill, and just trying to keep those kind of city connections as well. And so in terms of like the protest direct service, there was a Cook County jail, well, there was like demonstration in front of Cook County jail for Mother's Day. There was a bailout fund / donations Mother's Day, just kind of showing love, and there was an action around that we mobilized around. So those are some examples most recently of what we've been doing in those areas. And so in terms of like our relationship with the university and the city at large, when we look at the university, it might be easy to assume a distance between like an academic institution and the prison industrial complex or prisons. But obviously people with power in this university are making decisions every single day that affect the lives of members of the communities, surrounding communities of Hyde Park and Woodlawn, which we've touched on, as well as just the South Side. And like that affects kind of people who are at risk of incarceration, and then the more obvious examples like Aramark are there too. So, and even students, even though we're not making administrative decisions, we're studying and training to enter positions of power is what's going to happen. So the decisions that every student at this university makes with the degrees that we are going to get are also going to affect people at risk of incarceration and incarcerated people. And so with the political and social leverage that the university has, whether that's real estate, just the fact that if like they make a call, if Zimmer makes a call to Ron, like that's going to be different than a community member making a call to the mayor, obviously. So this leverage is something that we at SWAP take really seriously, and we kind of organize around taking advantage of that fact, not just like our privilege as students, which is a real privilege, but also like our ability to reach out to other organizations who are already doing this work on the South Side and in Chicago. And so I think without organizing and supporting other organizations around the city, which I'll get to, but they include like Black and Pink Chicago, I think that like we would consider our work a failure if we weren't supporting the people who are doing this work, especially given that we're students, and although some of us stay in Chicago, like for some of us it's just like a 4-year kind of thing, and then we're out. And there are people here who are doing like sustained work that we need to support. So one example of that, I mentioned Black and Pink Chicago. We had a Valentine's Day kind of event where we invited members of the community. That's actually how I got involved. I just came through and like wrote some Valentine's Day cards, and Black and Pink will connect you with specifically LGBTQ folks who are in solitary. And you can just kind of like either have a pen pal or just do these kind of holiday cards, which is obviously really great. And so another way that we do this is we'll invite speakers. For example, for our solitary teach-in, we invited someone who was formerly incarcerated, and obviously we like pay all our speakers, and most, if not all of our speakers are formerly incarcerated people. And that said, we also are hyper conscious of the fact that like we are students who are not in prison advocating for people in prison, and like need to make that very clear. It's different, like from UChicago United, for example, who's like advocating kind of on their behalf. We need to just make sure that our kind of core group of organizers are not people who are directly affected by the prison industrial complex in the way that like other groups are. So that's something to keep in mind. And then, yeah, finally, I think that I would say we also think a lot about, although we do look outwards, we also want to make sure that we're educating as many students as possible who are going to end up, like I said, with these degrees and these advantages, and are going to make decisions that will have a big effect and maybe in positions to like leverage, whether it be money, the job that they're going to end up in, etc. So we want to make sure that we're educating people, connecting them with abolitionist organizations, etc. Kind of the capacity building piece of it is important too. So yeah, we just take seriously kind of our duty as students to imagine a new university in which we are not just kind of engaged with our communities in ways that benefit the standing of the university, like allowing them to say like, look at our community service, but also believing that like we need to utilize our power and privilege as students to fight for like the South Side kind of more generally, and to advocate kind of against prisons. Yeah.
Thanks, Paula. So last but not least is Guy Emerson Mount. Guy is a postdoctoral fellow in the Department of History, where his work focuses on African American history, emancipation, and American empire. Along with Ashley Finnegan, Kane Jordan, and Kai Parker, he is one of the co-founders of Reparations at UChicago Working Group, which recently uncovered the University of Chicago's historical ties to slavery. So please welcome Guy.
So thank you everybody for being here. Thank you for all my co-panelists, and it's been fantastic to hear this amazing work that everyone is kind of engaged in, and I think this kind of coming together is exactly kind of the antidote that we need in order to kind of resist and reimagine some of the things that are going on out there. So I wanted, in the quick time that we have, I have 7 pages for you. So double-spaced, 12-point font, Georgia, because I like irony, but that's so I don't go on for 7 hours. I'll just do 7 pages, hopefully 1 a minute, and we'll be roughly within the ball game here. But in order to make the most of that, I want to see a quick show of hands. Who has had a chance to read our piece, A Case for Reparations Against the University of Chicago? Okay, so a lot of us, and maybe not all of us. So I'll give a brief, super brief kind of rundown on what that piece is about, and then we can kind of go from there. So I guess first, this kind of romantic, triumphant narrative of the University of Chicago that we're currently being kind of force-fed at these orientations, and these official histories of the university are just a complete lie. Part of the complicity with racism and the inevitability or the invisibility of racial injustice that takes place on this campus, I think, really stems from the passive acceptance of this master narrative of the university's history. So I'm here to tell you, without reservation, as a professional historian now, as of, a couple days ago, this entire university, everything that you see here exists because of slavery. Every department, every building, every penny of that $12 billion endowment was built directly and causally, we can show, through the blood, sweat, and tears of enslaved peoples. The origin narrative of this university does not begin in 1890, as the trustees would have you believe. This university actually begins, I would pin it, at 1848, when Stephen A. Douglas of the famed Lincoln-Douglas debates inherited a 3,000-acre cotton plantation in Lawrence County, Mississippi, along with the deeds to at least 123 enslaved human beings. So over the next decade, Douglas made millions of dollars in today's terms directly from slave labor, which he used to buy vast tracts of land on the south side of Chicago, land banking perhaps. And so in 1856, he gave 10 acres of that land on the northwest corner of 35th and Cottage Grove to the University of Chicago as its founding original endowment. He, and more accurately, the enslaved peoples of his plantation, literally created the University of Chicago. And what kind of slaveholder was this founding father of the University of Chicago? So as someone who studies this, I can tell you unequivocally that Douglass was among the worst of the worst. A third of his slaves were literally worked to death under his supervision. So imagine for a moment all of the horrors of slavery that you know about, the torture, the rape, the labor exploitation, the whippings, and everything else that constituted the daily lives of enslaved peoples. In that world, okay, in his own time, Mississippi slaveholders, fellow Mississippi slaveholders, publicly stated that the brutality that Douglass authorized on that plantation made him, quote, a disgrace to all slaveholders and the system they support. That's your university. That's your founding narrative, and this university does not exist in spite of that suffering. It exists only because of that suffering. So what are we going to do about it? So first, this history, I think, as painful as it is, has to be shared widely. I guess that the current levels of awareness on this campus, much less the broader Chicagoland area, about this history would be in the low single digits somewhere. At the Reparations at UChicago Working Group, we're currently preparing an edited volume that's going to further trace this longer racist history that some of us have been talking about through the university's support of restrictive covenants, segregation, the University of Chicago Police Department, the administrative practice of land banking, financial plunder of black communities, et cetera, et cetera. That new narrative needs to be written. We're also in the process of crowdsourcing and actively soliciting community members for stories on exactly how the University of Chicago has continued this legacy of slavery and discrimination into our present moment. So as part of this truth and reconciliation process, we want to document these individual experiences, collect oral histories, in order to write this new narrative that will center black lives and the damages that black communities have really faced at the hands of the university. And with this new narrative that to a certain extent we kind of already possess, right? We're already piecing this narrative together. I think we now have a powerful historical bludgeon with which to really smash the system of domination that we otherwise call the University of Chicago, which so often functions as a political state in miniature and a monopolizer of the legitimated use of violence here on the south side of Chicago. So all the demands and all the campaigns that we have here today, I believe, can benefit by tying themselves to this wider history and to reparations more broadly. So our organization is also already engaged with local communities and groups and individuals in the process of reparation that we are now framing through an international lens of transformative justice. So in this model, rather than beg the university for some kind of blue ribbon administrative heavy panel that's going to investigate its own racist history somehow, and then beg them for the kind of pitiful little crumbs that are being talked about at Harvard and Yale and Georgetown, we're instead starting this process of reparations without the university, but with the black-run community organizations who ultimately must control, direct, and shape the demands of any reparations project against the university. So in partnership with several of these community groups, we're also planning this trip to Mississippi in December in order to bring the descendants of the enslaved peoples themselves into this process, along with the black communities on the South Side, who are now the primary survivors of the University of Chicago's policies. So rather than just another social justice campaign, this move for reparations, I believe, has the potential to fundamentally reshape American politics in general. This is something I've written about, and also how we think about activism. So rather than another kind of these other punitive justice models we have that uphold individual property rights and kind of the neoliberal legal system, transformative justice, in the way that we're thinking about it, seeks as its goal not a fixed set of material concessions offered by one adversarial party kind of duking it out with another, but instead a cooperative, reparative process that has as its primary goal a transformed set of institutions, a new model of governance, and a fundamental reallocation of resources. So these structural transformations will hopefully not only serve themselves as reparations for crimes against humanity perpetuated in the past, but also will leave a newly transformed social context and a new set of power relationships that will make future crimes and racial injustices less likely. So in short, reparations is about much more than, I think, begging the university for X billion dollars to be distributed to the black survivors of institutional harm. Reparations, if done right, must entirely remake this university, its mission, and its decision-making. It needs to bring a new method of governance to the university where black communities, labor unions, student groups, faculty members, and the working class members of the campus community in general are not thought of as customers, which a university trustee literally referred to them as, but are the stakeholders and the decision makers. So in closing, I'd like to share one final thought here from our research that is really at the heart, I think, of what we're talking about. I have with me the actual names that we've got from the historical records of the enslaved peoples who lived and worked and died on the Douglas plantation in order to make this university possible. They can be found right over in the reg. They're buried in the special collections. And as far as I know, these individuals have never been publicly honored or acknowledged or even had their existence recognized on this campus. So for the first time, I think maybe in the history of the University of Chicago, I'd like to read aloud the names of the 123 enslaved peoples that we have currently identified thus far as a way to say that these Black lives matter and they will never be forgotten. So as I read these names, I'd like to remind you that these were real people, right, with real names and real families and real dreams and real fears. They suffered in a way that I think none of us, and I mean none of us, can possibly begin to imagine. So I want you to think about these human beings not as abstractions, not as symbols, not as memories, but for some of us here as our potential ancestors, our family members, and our loved ones. So please, as you hear these names, I want you to imagine a real person behind this name and try for a moment to grapple with the enormous scale of injustice that slavery, and by extension now, this university has imposed upon these individuals. Mully, Stanford, Rani, Sam, Lure, Johnson, Emily, Lizzie, William, Sam, June, Sunday, Rachel, Ruth, Sully, George, Hester, Lydia, Alfred, Nicholas, Julia, Sylvia, Mary, Cy, Mesu, John, Alexander, Albert, Parker, Agnes, Tempe, Linda, Frankie, Dolly, Sam, Luferu, Madison, Caswell, Everett, Richard, Nancy, Henrietta, Moses, Elizu, Sarah, Esther, Jacob, Solomon, Sibyllin, Lishi, Neru, Sarah, Amandi, Ned, Harriet, Nelson, Bethany, Janet, Preston, Britton, Rachel, Harrison, Mully, Billy, Merritt, Fox, Patsy, Anthony, Edmund, Violet, Lorana, James, Stanford, Clara, Crockett, Ebenezer, Billy, Phyllis, Alexander, Henderson, Sampson, Linda, Julia Ann, Joseph, Jane, Adeline, Alex, Tunnerson, Robert, Henry, Jerry, Lucy, Eliza, Susan, Manuel, Evans, Redditch, Pascal, Sally, Josie, Lizzie, William, Philip, Hannah, George, Eliza, Maria, Mary, Caroline, Madeline, Joshua, Celia, Martha, Anne, Rachel, Caesar, Willis, Nelson, Frankie, Joseph, John, Leidner, Sally, Martha.
Thanks, Guy. Do we want to give a round of applause to our... have any questions that you want to ask any of our panelists, just raise your hand. I'll take like 3 at a time.
Hey, everybody. So yeah, I really appreciate the talks that y'all gave. And I guess I just had a question. Maybe this is just to Alex. Or is it to Alex about sort of like you ended on, we could talk on like your work with BLLI and work around land stewardship, and to me it relates to exploring methods of like self-governance and collective action, right? As a way to respond to both housing issues in the city in places like Bronzeville and Washington Park, while also redefining our relationships to land and confronting issues of climate change, right, and gentrification. But what I didn't hear you say was any methods of engaging with like established power structures and institutions. And I was wondering if you could speak to like reasons why BYP 100 in particular doesn't look to institutions and like dominant structures to win those campaigns that you brought up in particular, but more broadly, right? Why is it important to organize independent of dominant institutions and power structures for not like corporations, but
thanks, Todd. Just so y'all know, I thank you. Okay, this is something that Todd and I have actually like kind of talked about a little bit, but I also like so in like I have a couple of things running through my head. The first is like organizing with or without like dominant power structures. We've had this conversation in BYP like when we had a conversation about our involvement with marches that get like police escorts and permits, right? Like how does our involvement in that like reflect on our politics? And I think that's also like just to consider in general as movements are growing and more people like want to get on the ground, right? You have to start asking yourself like, if you are asking for a permit or if you are asking for a police escort to protest police brutality, are you protesting police brutality? I don't know. I say no. I say no, you're not. I think it's really important, like, also, right, so trying to talk about this in a way that's, like, secure and safe. With our BLLI campaign, as I shared, we chose a space in the Bronzeville neighborhood, and one of the big questions was, are we going to purchase the space or are we going to take the space? And we decided that we were not going to go through the process of like getting the city's permission, because when you consider, right, all of the property that would be considered blighted, that is city owned, that the city has not touched, why are we asking for their permission to take care of it, to take care of something that was once ours? Like if you think about how, like, segregation in Chicago, and just like this idea of like being just and like fair. Black people were segregated to certain neighborhoods. Those neighborhoods were then divested from, like very intentionally. Resources are continuously pulled out of them, and then they take your house. It's and I think for us as young Black folks to like come into a neighborhood and claim a space that once belonged to to Black folks, to a family. It feels like it's dutiful. Like that, I think that's a personal driver for me, and I think that other folks in our organization would also like recognize this as like a duty of ours, to challenge, again, like challenging our understanding of ownership. When we were out there on Juneteenth, we were literally picking up trash and the police came by 8 times. 8. To see like, what are y'all doing out here? We're doing what y'all don't do. Like, why, you know, like, why are we being criminalized for cleaning up y'all's shit? And so I hope that answers your question, Todd, but like, for me, I just see it as like, we want this radically different society, in which like our neighborhoods are not over policed and we are not criminalized like for being in our own space. And the only way to get towards that like radical, I guess, like this radical bubble that we want is we have to do it in the way that's not traditional. And that just involves not involving white supremacist power structures. Yeah.
Thanks, Alex. Any other questions from the audience? Go ahead.
I have a question for reparations.
Yes.
Person, sorry, I didn't catch your name.
Sure,
But,
Guy.
I was wondering, do you guys also work with other different, like, I guess, wrongdoings of the university towards Black and Brown communities, or is it specifically around slavery? Because, like, I know, like, obviously that's horrible, but there's also been, like, I'm just wondering what's the scope of it, because there's also been, like, other really fucked up movements and just harm done by the university to Black and Brown communities for profit and other things like that.
Exactly. So we're hoping that this case about slavery really contextualizes those, right, and really provides additional ammunition for people already working on those issues, right, to say that, look, this is not an isolated incident, right, this is deeply part of the university's DNA, right, it's in the university's core. And so part of the edited volume that we're going to be doing is hopefully going to be chronicling that longer narrative and that longer history to really, as a counterpoint, I don't know if you guys know John Boyer's book on the history of the University of Chicago, which is a very rosy, kind of romantic, triumphant, story. This story, right, that starts at slavery and certainly doesn't end there, right, and it's certainly still going on now, this harm to Black communities, it needs to be, it needs to be told. It needs to be told in full. It needs to be documented. It needs to be kind of unequivocally true, I think, in order to have the university come to the table, right? Because otherwise they can just dismiss this as, a bunch of crazy radical leftists talking this crazy talk, and they don't listen to Black voices anyway, right? Black folk that come up and say, this is what's happening, they discount that, right? But the curious thing is, when historians call it oral history, now all of a sudden, and I put it in a footnote, now all of a sudden someone's going to listen, right? And the university, that's their language, right? That's their currency in a lot of ways. And so that's part of the project, the intellectual project. And then on the activist side, what I'm thinking, and actually I skipped ahead to one of the parts that was going to tie some of this together, was I think all of the things that we're doing can individually, right, in terms of current injustice, can be reframed and can be brought under this umbrella of reparations, using all of this history, using all of the current situation, and describe this as a bigger process and able to build a giant coalition, right, of groups working on racial injustice in order to bring the university to account, right, and to have them participate in that process. And I love this idea of building first, right? And that's really what we're doing. We have not publicly gave the university any demands. We haven't told the university, create your blue ribbon panel. We've been working within Black communities in order to bring people in and say, what does this mean, right? Because this is brand new information for a lot of people. And so digesting it and contending with it, both as a campus community and a wider community, it's figure that part out first and then invite the university to join the process that's already underway and that's already happening. That's kind of our strategy. At this point, it's not a secret. I mean, we've told everyone about this, and it's build power first, educate, right? Let everyone get awareness on this campaign to let everyone know what's going on, and then everybody that wants to kind of participate and say, hey, the stuff that we're doing, we need reparations. And again, reparations in our kind of framework is a transformed university, right? It's a completely reimagined institution. So yes, it's a white power structure. So the question is, how do you get that white power structure to be under the control of Black people, right? Who have been harmed and who are literally owed the entire $13 billion endowment that the university has, right? I mean, that's our starting point, is that everything here at the university is owed to Black communities who are harmed by this, because it wouldn't exist without them. It's very unique in the history of university reparations programs, where universities might have existed but didn't, wouldn't have existed as have as much wealth. This is a different case, right? This is the whole thing started with slavery, and it continued through all of these things that we're describing and talking about. So if all the people working on this can get together and say, we are going to start talking amongst ourselves and figure out what this is going to be, and then we're going to have the university come in when we're ready, and we're going to tell them what's what, I think that's the way to go.
Can I add something?
Please.
So his point about like building power first and like working within yourselves first, I also think is really important to avoid your movement or your thing being co-opted.
Yes.
Because that's a thing, and it's a really dangerous thing. And so I think that that's like a very smart, like it's a strong and like really important strategy to have, I think, regardless of like what your movement is. And like I think that's also maybe another reason to not work with authority in pushing your movement forward, because it can so easily be like your message can be changed given whoever has the most money in the room. But if we're all broke, then we all get to make the right decision. So I think that that's really important.
And perhaps it's a question of until you know you can take over.
Yeah.
Right? Until you know you can restructure that institution into your own liking, don't mess with it. Right? Let them
Don't
do their
tell your
thing.
secrets.
Don't tell your secrets, right? Like keep people who's close to you, and like we've got a lot of love in this room. We've got a lot of people that can do a lot of things. And the Georgetown descendants are up to 4,000 people now. So and they're doing this remarkable thing where the Georgetown descendants are actually not a lot, basically that whole thing's been co-opted. The Georgetown descendants are now emerging and self-organizing, and they're saying, we're not going to have it. We want more radical demands than what the university is offering. And so we're saying, aha, why don't we do that first, right? Build 4,000 like descendants, which is roughly the same number of people if you do the math out. You got 4,000 people ready to roll. You've got enough people on campus ready to roll. We have some other things in the pipeline that are going to bring kind of a national spotlight to this. And the university is going to be shamed into having to do something. And I think we need to be organized and be ready.
Thank you. Do we have any more questions? Kane and then Tom.
Just one on the CBA. I found it very interesting. And I was wondering, because of course Coco and staff and the organizations are working on with the CBA coalition. I'm wondering if they're trying to have a mechanism outside of the Obama Library, Obama Foundation, to hold them to account for their demands.
Right. Yeah. So the coalition has been considering pursuing an option where we get a CBA ordinance introduced to the Chicago City Council. That's still kind of a work in progress right now, but that would help to get us some of the demands that we want to place on the Obama Foundation through that ordinance. There was a really cool campaign this past election cycle in Detroit, led by a woman named Rashida Tlaib, who's awesome, came to speak to the coalition one time, who basically was organizing a, now I'm blanking on the name of what they're called, like a referendum in the city of Detroit that basically stated that any development project in the city of Detroit over so many $1 million, and I forget the number now, maybe it was like 50 or something like that, you have to have a community benefits agreement negotiated with neighborhood groups. And I mean, like, if we did that in the city of Chicago, like, that would be game-changing. It would change everyone's idea of what development looks like, what it should be, who it should benefit, who should have a say over what kind of development is brought into a neighborhood, because it radically shifts that power away from these, unelected, unaccountable, wealthy developers to the people living in those communities who are maybe saying, whoa, hold on, if we put another condo high-rise here, what's going to happen when our rents start to go up and we can no longer afford to live where we live? So we're looking now at that city aspect to see what's possible there. So, yeah.
Talk about the next question.
So thank you so much for all your presentations. I really learned a lot about the kinds of organizing work that you all are doing. I was wondering if any or all of you would want to speak to the aspect of your work that involves talking to people who might be affected by the kinds of structures that you outlined for us, whether it's white supremacy, racism, capitalism, in different ways, or complicit in them even. But what it means to move people or mobilize people who might think differently from you or are just unable to or indifferent to organizing. So yeah, I'm just wondering if there's anything that you can share in terms of strategies or organizational priorities.
Somebody on the end want to start?
Yeah, I think right now our focus is kind of making sure that like everyone who's already, I guess, like a part of SWAP or is willing to partner, like has the ability to like organize in like the most productive ways, et cetera, et cetera. But I think like outreach wise, I know that we have kind of like a lot more people on our email list, for example, than actually end up like during our weekly meetings where we like kind of sketch everything out. And I think that a lot of it is because we like place ourselves in situations, so like in the middle of Reynolds Club, which is like a place where a lot of students pass through, and you see like Valentine's Day cards, oh that's cute, and you just kind of like sign your name, and maybe don't actually maybe don't understand like what we're doing. So what we have been trying to do is like making a point to reach out to every single person that like writes their email down, even if it's just casually, or even if they don't necessarily like, if they feel, like you said, ambivalent to organizing, etc. And I remember a fourth year that graduated said like, let's meet for coffee and figure out like what you're trying to get out of this, or what your expectations are, or maybe even trying to gauge like where our knowledge about the issue is at, because a lot of people are like all over the place in terms of that. So I think one thing we do is like try to seem approachable in terms of our location, which is easy. I mean, we're university students, so we have access to funds as an RSO, and we can kind of position ourselves in places that a lot of students will kind of run into us, and then like the follow-up. So that's, I think, one way that we interact. I don't know in terms of interacting with people who like vehemently disagree, but I think the people who are like ambivalent or just kind of signing up because they thought it was vaguely interesting, or like the people that were kind of interested in roping into our efforts and trying to educate as well. So that's like one thing.
So I don't have a good answer, because I think when you talk about the abolition of police and prisons, people are looking at you like, okay, then what? And we don't have a then what. And so that can be kind of hard to mobilize people around and to move people. And I think that, I mean, and like, so like another example, more specifically, right, in talking about the gang database, we've had a lot of trouble just getting our own membership into the issue. And part of that is because of the way expanded sanctuary has been framed as like you're either for or against like immigration, when in reality we also have to think about how a gang database and sanctuary impacts Black folks. But that messaging wasn't there, like we had to create that. And I think we still haven't gotten to use it like as much as we would like to, but sometimes it takes some deep thinking and maneuvering, figuring out like what the personal pressure points are for the different groups of people that you're talking to. On November 10th, we are having an event with Critical Resistance. This is not a plug, this is an example. We're having an event with Critical Resistance around abolition and expanded sanctuary. And like one of our goals in that event is to move people towards abolition that maybe wouldn't have thought of it before. And so unfortunately, the revolution needs baby steps. And I think that's like where like our movement is. I think that's where a lot of movements are right now, in that baby step stage of like trying to frame an issue like as broad as you can, but also like in a way that's like very specific and makes people want to get involved.
Since we've been, UChicago for a Community Benefits Agreement has been so blessed to work with our coalition partners, Southside Together Organizing for Power, Kenwood Oakland Community Organization, Brownsville Regional Collective, we were able to interact with these people that are actually out in the community in this issue that we're working on, and it just provides this incredible opportunity for kind of what I think, Guy, you were bringing up earlier, this ability for personal storytelling. To have someone from that community share with you their lived experiences and their kind of hopes and their fears is incredibly powerful and moving. Going to some of the summits that the CBA campaign has been having, where you hear people talk about how it feels to think that they might lose their home, that can be I think, a really kind of a life-changing experience. And so I put a lot of hope in kind of those personal stories and those kind of personal connections that can kind of change hearts like that.
So for me, if someone thinks fundamentally differently than I do about slavery, I really don't want to talk to that person. That's actually, it's funny, right? I mean, but if anyone's going to defend slavery as an institute, I mean, they're gone, right? Now, it doesn't mean those people aren't out there. Roughly 30% of Americans, when you survey them, actually believe that slavery was ended too soon, right? That black folk weren't ready for freedom. So those folks are out there. There's probably some of those folks on this campus. But I think that's one of the good things about this campaign is that people can latch onto it, and the people that might not otherwise listen to prison abolition say, well, do you think slavery's bad? Do you think the University of Chicago should maybe offer reparations for slavery? Yeah, I do. Okay, so maybe some of that money might go towards making a better criminal justice system, right? It's a different sell and it's a different conversation. I'm hoping that folks can kind of pick up on that in taking an issue that is really, to a reasonable human being, right, just incontrovertible. Yes, slavery's bad. Any institution that dealt in slavery needs to pay reparations. That should just be basic, right? And then from there, all of these other things that might be a little harder sells and you might have more opposition to, now all of a sudden you can open some doors and you can start a conversation from a point of agreement where everyone can be on the same page, and then from there, spit it outward.
Yeah, so for what we're doing, I think isn't very radical. Our demands aren't very radical. They're really rather commonsensical. But what I think is, like, in our project, what has the potential to be radical is getting a room full of like students of color of all races, of all ethnicities, and talking about what this place could be for us and for people like us. So what we've all kind of struggled with and had to talk about is how to like coalition build, which is also about talking to people who who agree with the same kinds of things you do and have the same values, but really kind of getting together and thinking, how do our values or how do our missions intersect, and where did they diverge, and how can we support each other in those places where they diverge, or like in the work. And I think part of that is really reaching out to younger students at the university to kind of pass down the knowledge that doesn't get preserved by institutions, and talking about the work that has been done in the past. Because for UC United, we were kind of founded last quarter, but there have been maybe 3 or 4 kind of iterations of this coalition in the last 15 years. And I maybe have knowledge of one iteration of that. So I think what it really comes down to is passing down histories and learning how to connect and work together.
We've got time for a couple more questions. Go ahead.
Hey, my name's Corey. I'm with the UChicago branch of the International Socialist Organization. I first learned about the Reparations at UChicago Working Group at the Radical Walking Tour that we did a few months back, but I think all this other stuff is a little bit newer to me, and I'm really glad it's all coming together in this room. I think I have a question that kind of flows from the previous question, which I think is about, like, I think, like, some of the things that people are talking about are, like, I mean, everything people are talking about is, like, really inspiring, and I think, like, the language of, like, what the type of transformation that people are envisioning, I think is so important when we're thinking about, you know, obviously university that runs on a different set of priorities than the students and community have. And what sort of like a radical or revolutionary transformation of the university and the city, I think kind of entails. I also think it can be a little bit hard to wrap our heads around like what that process could look like and what that means when we are currently a fairly small group of folks. And I think sort of flowing from the previous question about like how do you talk to more folks and bring them in, I think my question is also about like the world outside of Hyde Park and about how we are building continuity with the broader social struggles that are happening, because I think it can be really hard, and you know, speaking from you know being a former campus activist, I've graduated a while ago from another school, many other schools. So like how do you kind of all with your organization sort of view the continuity of your groups and sort of like what kind of sustains this work beyond you know this or that sort of campaign, but also maybe how do folks envision, you know, things like defending DACA and working around, you know, maybe some of the broader movements or single payer or things like that that help build the solidarity that folks are talking about that I think would be necessary to and building power. I think that would sort of help conceptualize a little bit more of like how do we see getting to where we want to be with all the many sort of I think probably pretty formidable challenges I think that are ahead around you know some of these particular campaigns.
I think as I'm gonna speak like as an undergrad who's like working with undergraduate students. It can, I mean, you say like formidable challenges. It can feel like a lot. To feel like this responsibility to kind of like a continuous movement when you also like have certain, I guess, like obligations as a student to the university, if that makes sense. And so something that like I have tried to do, and I think that SWAP does, is like finding a way to kind of integrate like say like the framework of transformative justice into like my like daily life. So whether that's like in interaction with like my partner that could like turn into something that is like revenge based, and I like try to reimagine it in a different way and like approach it a different way. So like kind of interpersonal little things that might not seem like much, but make me feel like I'm equipped to kind of go on and like continue to do the work that needs to be done. I don't know if that makes sense. But then also in terms of like outside of Hyde Park, we have like a Facebook page, obviously, that we try to connect people with, and something that I think the students that graduated before me have done a really good job of doing is like being plugged into networks kind of across the country that are doing kind of the same work that we are. And so sometimes we'll get like a call to action to call a DA's office and put pressure, but the DA is like in California, but it doesn't matter because something really shitty is happening next to his prison. And so we need to like just kind of quickly like divert some of our attention to this issue and like try to be aware at all times that that there are things happening outside of Chicago. And so I don't know. It's hard.
I have like a couple of things like pinging in my head. I think the first thing, like personally for me, I think like within the last 2 years, my understanding of racial capitalism has changed my life. And I imagine that like when people start like really understanding like racial capitalism, like racism and capitalism, how they sustain each other, I think, yes, like a lot of our movements are sort of like separate and siloed in issue, but at the end of the day, we are all like high-key fighting racial capitalism. But I don't know that like messaging has been like made very clear. And I think if it was very clear, like we wouldn't have this like dumpster fire presidency. And I don't think it'll happen again in the near future. That's debatable, but like I think that understanding right there, like of racial capitalism, like period, and how just like also this is related, right? Like BYP 100, we operate through this Black queer feminist lens, and that didn't mean a whole lot to me until I realized like that is the literal opposite of the society we live in. Black, queer, and feminist is like the literal opposite. And anything that we are working towards, right? Like Honor Her Labor did not start out centering Ida B. Wells. We were thinking about that monument until somebody was like, oh, Ida B. Wells is buried there. Actually, this is how we should be framing this campaign. Little things like that, like changing your framing just a little bit, I think helps connect to like the broader issues. And yeah, so just that idea, right, of like me being like the physical, walking, tangible opposite of like this system that I'm fighting is like very hopeful for me also, to know that like me getting up every day is resistance. That's also very tiring. But it's important to keep in mind as something to like help connect our movements, right? It's like how when you wake up every day, like how are you embodying like resistance against this like humongous like behemoth of oppression? Like how are you fighting that just like within your own personal space? It's really important to consider.
Yeah, and I think this kind of week where we kind of bring together, 9 different organizations, I think, provides us kind of a way to do that. Like, I know that I have learned things through this process about, campaigns that I didn't know about, or perspectives that, other people have brought to the table. So it's getting people together in a way that allows us to learn from each other to build that broader movement. I was going to say something else, but it has just popped out of the head, so I'll pass it to you.
It pops back in.
I will let you know.
I'm reminded here of this notion of Du Bois's that not a lot of people work on. Robert Gooding Williams, who was in the poli-sci department, he's now at Columbia, used to talk about Du Bois's concept of a long siege, right, against white supremacy, right? Which this was X number of years. This is probably like 70 years ago, right? And the siege is still kind of happening, right? And it's ever elongating. And so I think what we can do, I love these ideas of localism and then hyper-localism, which you're talking about on like a personal level in your apartment, right? How can you live a transformative justice model in my apartment, right? And then in my community. And then we've got these bigger national things at stake, but the way that I see it is this is a laboratory, and the University of Chicago is literally a nation in miniature. Right? It has its own power set, it has its own army, it has its own set of institutions, right? That you have a better chance at cracking this place than I think you do, let's say, the Trump administration at this point, right? Why? A, we're here. B, you have, and again, I'm going to completely like make enemies here. Let's say a slightly less malevolent set of institutions than the Trump regime, right? They're slightly more amicable to change. We just had a trauma center campaign where we saw them fold, right? They folded, they lost, they gave up, right? So they're beatable, right? the old Predator. You guys see that thing? If it bleeds, we can kill it, right? It's like it bleeds, and so you can kill it, right? I don't think we can kill the Trump regime right yet. It's going to probably implode. Who knows what's going to happen? Anyway, I see this, our program of reparations. I think what could happen here is you could have this laboratory effect. You can have this thing that works that can be replicated in other places, right? So other people can jump into this local, hyper-local kind of scale and then build outward from there, rather than, we can build these giant coalitions to try to do a national thing. Yes, let's do that too, diversity of tactics, but for me, I think there's a golden opportunity here. We have a really, I think, winnable set of campaigns that if we can all come together, we can really, get some serious things done with a lot of money behind it.
Sorry, was the question like how are we conceptualizing our campaigns in like the broader political sphere?
Yeah, and like sustaining them through the ups and downs of the broader like political movements and the national political stage, I guess.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's a big part question. But I think kind of just like echoing what I said before, like students have been fighting the same fight as us for decades, and I think it's just kind of knowing what work has been done and not redoing that work and where to continue, and like as Guy said, kind of taking lessons from successful campaigns, and also just thinking like what happens on this campus like matters. Like this is the cradle of like neoliberalism, right? Like what happens if we start to like reimagine the ways that the university like values like the lives of people of color? And I think it goes much further than just kind of thinking about solely like the Trump administration or something like that.
Okay, so we're basically out of time. So maybe we can give another round of applause. Thank you so much for talking, and I hope many more conversations can come out of this night. I would like to plug that tomorrow at noon we are having a rally, which is kind of like Friday. We are having a rally. We did not finish on Friday, we are having a rally at noon in the main quad. I think we're starting around Levy Hall. Is that right? Yeah. You can ask them about it. So, thank you for coming tonight.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Ibram Kennedy's first book.
No.
Ibram Kennedy's first book was on the birth of the radical black student movement.
There's a lot of work,
kind of like origins of ethnic studies.
Sustainable walking.
So yes, Ibram Kendi. I'm trying to remember the title,
She's
but it goes back to
interested in
his
kind
first book.
of land, like ownership of the land.
Do you have like her contact?
Yeah, I should send it to you. I'm
K-E-N-D.
sure I
Yeah,
have your email.
Kendi.
If you send it to you, I probably got it.
And the other one is called Nation Rising, which is about the Hawaiian sovereignty movement in general, and situating the studies and Hawaiian studies of Hawaii in light of Hawaiian sovereignty. It's a compilation, and it's got kind of the history, which is a unique history.
Different organizations. So these are all the organizations sponsoring.
Actually, one of the co-writers. This was one of the initial kind of
unfortunately, we
reparations.
will have everybody on the
Black studies, ethnic studies, Negro studies. This is like reparations. That's
but yeah,
one
so
of the
we're
things
all just kind of coming together this week to start to learn
how history department. There's rumbles that possibly on that there are possible things on the right, at least for African American studies, right? So this is something
this teaching was supposed to help that
talking about
on Friday. So it's a cool event to come together.
Yeah, sure. Well, I know this week is almost over, and I may or may not be able to make it on Friday. But like, how can I like learn more and get involved? Like, is there like a reason to
So send your email just on the email.
Oh yeah, I would love to
Continue
sign
follow
up.
up.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
Yeah, absolutely.
more campusy than
What do you go to?
I thought it was.
I think I'm going to a rag.
Yeah. You want
I'm Charlie, by the way.
Yeah, Rob.
I love that. You go to the
Thank you so much.
I'm sure they were on the email list.
journalist and I was doing stuff.
Okay.
Yeah, I think it went really well.
I've been in med school.
You guys are having is that a resident event? Yeah, it is. Okay, when is that?
It's a naturopathic med school, but it's still
I'm speaking at the
it's out in Lombard. It's called National University.
Look for it online.
It's a chiropractor's my stuff.
This is Kane's.
Oh, hi.
Yeah, because she's my mother's family friend of ours.
Oh,
Nice to meet you, Alex. Thanks for speaking
more stuff. Occupying trains and stuff like that.
Yeah, that was cool. Train takeover.
There's something you're saying about how like people ask.
You have to go to the campus.
Yeah, go to the
talk
campus.
about like
Lombard, which is out past it.
What next after that? It's like, do you not think that in the struggle for that we wouldn't be like radically changed as a community?
Right, and I think, right, it's also like our fear of holding each other accountable.
Cool.
There's someone that I think is coming that I really
We'd
want
rather
to
invest in a very unsafe group of people to hold us accountable.
For the sake of like convenience and not having to like engage.
She's the model.
She's the model. Yeah.
Come up with
Her
crazy
Your wife's
solutions,
right?
She's living on the south side now, right? And wants to get plugged into everything. New in town kind of thing. And yeah,
I can work with
totally.
that.
You guys would get along.
People are still scared of like having conversations.
I'll let you.
Don't want to.
It's fine.
Thank you.
No, thank you.
No, we definitely have to like build up the ground rules.
You sign up on our email list. Our email list.
Tomorrow at 4:30.
Tomorrow's 4:30.
Numbness or like, we just want everything to be like automated for us or something. So that, you know.
Kind of smaller.
Oh yeah, which is like, it's just one of the evil geniuses of like organized capitalism is providing.
The history is really interesting.
Yeah.
So you know,
I will make sure
Yeah.
to do the
Cool. Please.
and now I'm like,
Tobacco.
obviously.
Tobacco.
Right.
So I actually have I'm supposed to be talking with Tavolia Cliff. I don't know if you took courses with her.
I did.
So Coach actually put me in contact with her. I'm supposed to have a meeting with her because she's working on this.
Okay. I'm curious, 'cause she was one of the, I mean, I was there during the class scandal.
Yes.
So I had a lot of classes with all
I
of
gotta remember to tell her you said hi. She'll hear your name.
That's why.
All right, take care. Thanks. Wait. One quick thing.
Yeah.
Do you know, fantastic stuff, by the way. Thank you. You're awesome.
Really cool work that you're doing.
Yes.
What?
And tell, yeah, it's do you know Kay? Or no?
No, I don't. Hi, Alex. Nice to meet you.
So, tell Adam, I always mispronounce your name.
Alex.
No, your name's Alex, but no,
Adam.
I always get the accent wrong.
Yeah, I know. Yeah.
We said, yeah, thank you. It was good to have you guys here. Do you know Walter Johnson's book? His most recent one, which is called River of Dark Dreams. Yeah. Right? He has a concept called slave racial capitalism. So what he's doing, right? You mentioned racial capitalism. Because this is the new history of capitalism has been doing this for some time now. Right? He's trying to think about the origins of American capitalism as rooted in slavery. Right? That slavery is not a pre-capitalist institution, but that slavery is in fact like the engine that made capitalism, as well as the actual template of capitalism. Right? It then became racialized over time, usually after emancipation, because slavery is no longer this institution. You still want to keep the capitalism, so you racialize the thing. Right? So that kind of arc and that his theoretical frame, right? And again, tying in slavery to this is.
You can consider these things. Kianga, yes, in Black Lives Black Liberation has like a really good analysis that actually I think is what changed my like understanding of racial capitalism. It's very similar, but I love the book. So
yeah, that is the book. You're reading it. His first book is better actually. He doesn't have that concept in there, but his first book, Soul by Soul, is just amazing. It's the most in-depth inside thing of slavery. He does deal with slavery as capitalism and kind of the idea of consumption, the idea that black bodies were consumed through this process of enslavement and everything. It's amazing. But that second book is theoretically kind of more rich, I think, for the stuff that you're doing. And he's got this thing on work, right, where the work of enslavement itself, right, you think of it as like there's torture and there's work. He says, no, the work itself was torture. And he goes through this thing, like you're in the same location doing, this is like, it's all textbook torture, like sensory deprivation, lack of sleep. All these are classic like torture methods. So the work itself was torture. think of that in terms of people working these jobs today, right?
Yeah.
A dude in a McDonald's window that just has to sit here and do this over and over and over again. That's torture, man. That's work is torture. So yeah, that book is River Dark Dreams, Walter Johnson. Can't say enough about it.
Thank you. Is your email like in the? There was like a. Okay.
It should be there, and I'm easy to
Because I would like
Google.
to.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah,
It was nice meeting you. It was good talking to you.
You blog? Yeah, my blog.
So I told him that we went to
Yeah. Because you work with Johnson, right?
Yeah.
He had this thing where he said, I was going to mention it when you were talking about it, but he said when they went to go to the university and meet with their little representative, you might have been there for this, where they go to meet the representative and they tell, we want a community benefits agreement. And they're like, why would we do that? Were you there for this?
No, I wasn't, but I heard about it
this,
afterwards.
right?
Yeah.
And so for me, this is like, okay, why do you have a history of slavery? That's why you have to do this, right? Yeah. It's a bludgeon. It's just this. You can always whip this card out and just throw it on the table and be like, because of slavery.
Yeah.
You want to uphold slavery? You want to get behind slavery and say you didn't do it? Come say you didn't do it. Like, we'll get you if you try to say you didn't do it. We know you did it. And so that's why. And so I think a standing community benefits agreement, or like a standing, like one of the things we've been envisioning, okay, what does that new governance look like? Is something like your coalition, right? They're about just a permanent seat, right, at the table that basically gets to dictate these community. Every time the university does any project, you now have to go through this. And why? That's part of your reparations project.
Yeah.
Right? It's part of your
Absolutely.
reparations program.
Absolutely.
These bodies that exist, these community groups, they say what you can do and what you can't do. Why? Reparations. Why? Slavery. I think that's like, that we don't have to keep fighting the same battle to make them do something they're not legally required to do.
Exactly. And that goes along the same lines of what they were trying to do in Detroit, which is to institutionalize that CBA process so that you don't have to try and build what can be really positive coalitions, but incredibly time-consuming.
You got to fight
every
year.
single time, and it's just impossible to do that every time. And having that institutionalized process where they're at the table with the university every single time is that would be the end goal.
It's the way to get it. It's the way to get it. It doesn't cost them anything in their mind. It's the great thing. Their little accounting mechanism, right? If you say, give me $5 billion, they're like, oh, they can account for that. If you say, oh, we want this community governance board that's going to have, they know it in one sense, like one hand knows there's going to be money involved. We're going to lose money on this deal. But another part of it is, well, it doesn't cost anything now, so I don't see a subtraction line. Sure, go for it.
And you know what? They did something similar to that with the Trauma Center. Even after they got the Trauma Center, now there's this new board with sitting community members on it that is going to try and keep pushing for different things, and the university can keep doing that to make sure that the Trauma Center works, basically. Maybe I like that.
You gotta get in those bipolar structures, man.
Yeah.
You gotta change them things.
I was also very interested in like a lot of what you were talking about in terms of like some of the facts that you brought up, and I was wondering like where you had.
Oh, you know what?
Yeah, that 83,000.
Yeah, I was like, oh.
Most of that is in. I think it's Arnold Hirsch is
Oh,
making it the second ghetto.
Yeah.
I think that was where I got most of that. I did this might have been my second year. I did a paper on Hyde Park Urban Renewal, and he was a big source. I was in the special collection archives too for a lot of that, and looking at some of those memos from Kimpton and from Julian Levi, the head of the SECC. I mean, it's just
Could you write that paper?
And can you,
if you have it?
No, and can you write that up and you be part of that edited volume?
Oh.
To write that thing up.
Oh yeah, sure. No, I've got the paper and everything.
I'd love to see that.
Oh, sure.
Yeah.
This is the kind of like story, right? We need to like build this meta story.
Yeah.
They can like, again, try to fight if they want and then look like idiots when they do.
Yeah, could you give us your email?
Yeah, sure. And it should be on that
Oh yeah.
emails you've been seeing.